Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of STR Success. I'm Dave Menapace, president of the 5-Star Co-host. I'm joined here with Mr. Will Van Wickler, England's #1 short-term rental real estate agent. Will, how you doing, man?
I'm doing good. Good to see you, Dave. Welcome back.
Thank you. Yeah, I had to take a week off last week, but back in action now. I'm excited.
Much better with you here, man.
Thank you. It's always fun hanging out. Appreciate it. I'm really excited for our topic this week. And, before I introduce it, what I'll say is the topic that we're going to noodle on today is one that I think is really timely, especially as we come into a time of year when we see a lot of short-term rentals being bought and sold, right? We're usually in between high seasons, between the mountains or the beaches or the lakes. And lots of trading happening this time of year. Very normal, very exciting for the managers out there. This is a pretty popular time to be picking up new clients on the co-hosting front. And
it's hunting season.
It's hunting season. That's right.
Right.
For everyone to eat. Obviously, like after a peak season or ahead of a peak season, really, I find spring and fall to be the #1 times to buy and sell real estate as it relates to vacation rentals and short-term rentals. So why don't you introduce the topic that we'll go over today?
Yeah, it's something I'm super passionate about, numbers and finances and all that stuff. So we're going to be talking about budgeting and personal finance for your properties in your portfolio, treating this like a business. We see so many people that just buy these assets and then they're done, or they buy these assets and then we're in mud season in the mountains right now and it's not nice enough to go to the beach and they're like, I have no income. Then they have to panic sell. So we're going to talk all about the budgeting, the personal finance, the operations behind, the money coming into these properties and how you can set yourself up for success, both on the acquisition. We'll spend a couple seconds on that. And then mainly in the operation of these properties as a sole property owner and as a property manager like Dave.
Totally. So maybe one thing, we can almost tailor this discussion around the journey of somebody owning a short-term rental from pre-purchase to purchase and setup to operations and like ongoing management of their own home. So why don't we talk about the pre-purchase? So much goes into purchasing a home before you've actually purchased it. I think some of it is your financial position, right? How much cash do you have and where's that cash coming from? What was your down payment going to be? What's your credit score? Is it going to be bought in your personal name? Is it going to be bought in an LLC? I think one of the things that people are really struggling with right now, maybe 6, 8, 10, 12 months after a purchase is, they're just caught with a really high interest rate. And some of the analysis that they did was based off of 2022 numbers, but, their overall debt service and utilities and things like that are just really high and maybe they're just not cash flowing. What are some things that you could suggest to folks to get themselves in a good financial position so when they do buy a home, they have an appropriate sort of rainy day fund and can float that asset?
Yeah, the first thing is make sure everything at home is good, right? Talking about houses, but there's a lot of people that maybe it's not their fault, right? Maybe it was an issue with something and they just didn't check their credit. I mean, I've heard of people with phone bills that went unpaid by accident and then they got dinged even after they canceled, right? Happened to you, right?
Yep.
And you're not a late payment kind of guy, but it happens, right? People's credit gets hammered, but they still want to make the purchase. And while I appreciate the enthusiasm, a lot of the times we're running assumptions based on these interest rates, and then people get market is 7, then they get a 9, and then they buy it anyway, and then they blame the market. When in reality, it has to all work cohesively. And interest rate really doesn't matter if you plan appropriately for it. But as a fiduciary in the real estate business, you shouldn't buy a short-term vacation rental if you can't afford it, right? There's a lot of people still with a lot of consumer debt, or they're doing, putting a lot of stuff on credit cards with no way to pay it back, or home equity lines of credit with variable interest rates just for the down payment. That makes me nervous. If you cannot afford to make the down payment, you should not be investing. There are circumstances where leverage makes sense. A big guy on leverage. I love financing real estate because it makes me money. But you got to have cash reserves. So for me, have strong cash reserves going into it. Understand what your true buying power is and understand what the monthly payment is. And can you actually afford to pay that with no rent coming in? Long
Right.
term rentals, the investors with long term think much more about this than the short term people. Because we were in a market 2 years ago when you could just rent like this. Right now, it's a slow time in the mountains, slow time in the beach, where you might need to float for a couple months to have those reserves in place and then actually have a budget in place for the property. I really appreciate a new client of mine came to me. They said, I have $150,000 total to invest. What price point would you recommend? Now, I don't know their goals, but it's pretty easy to break it down. We have a 10% down payment, then we have your furnishings and renovation budget, and then we have some cash reserves. So let's just back into that math, and I think
Right.
that's a good way to do it. And then the other thing is make sure you have money for everything. Line it out. A lot of people are missing expenses like photography, and they're cheaping out on photos, or they don't want to do photos right away. Or they only get photos and there's no snow on the ground, or it's not when the beach is nice and sunny. So I'm rambling off a lot of things, but a lot of those items are just pre-purchase before you even jump in.
Totally. And what I'll say is the best time to buy a property is not always the necessarily in the best time to rent, and that's
Yeah.
okay, right? But like, for example, Cape Cod, you're gonna have the most inventory starting in August. That's when things start to come on the market because people know they can use their house for the rest of the summer and it'll close in September. But the reality is that you're not really going to see any income until like May of the following year. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just you have to understand that you're going to be floating that mortgage for 6, 7, 8 months until you actually start to get some renters in, assuming that you have a similar rental season to what the prior year was, which is not always the case. Up in the mountains, it can be weather dependent. It's not very weather, but it can be weather dependent, particularly in the spring and in the fall, right? When
Right.
it's nice and places are open, people might make a last minute trip. But I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially the ones that get caught with a 7, 8, or 9% loan. And so, how do people get caught with the really high interest loans? Well, and again, right now we're focused on pre purchase. We'll get into what happens once you purchase in just a moment. But some of it could be credit. Some of it could, if you
A
have some
lot of it's credit. Recently, from what I'm seeing, talking to these mortgage brokers, a lot of personal credit, which is surprising, but it's a thing.
right. And I think we all come from this bigger pockets mentality of like maximize all the leverage you can, but there's consequences to that. So you just have to
Right.
understand both sides of it. The people that have cash, that have a lot of money, are laughing all the way at the bank right now. Usually like they have dynamite credit, or maybe they even put 30 or 40% down, or maybe they bought in all cash and they're like, yeah, at some point in the next 10 years, I'm going to refinance out of this and I'll go deploy that cash somewhere else. But it's just you got to understand like what it takes to compete in a specific market. And if you can't compete in that market, meaning buy a house in that market, don't get discouraged. Go do some homework and maybe find another market that could more better satisfy your needs at a different price point, right? Nobody's forcing anyone to buy, in Harwich, Cape Cod, or, Bethel and Newry, right? That price point is in like that more 600 to a million. It's not 2 to 500,000 like it was pre-pandemic. So it's just important to know that. The other thing is, for obvious reasons, it's not a bad idea at times to buy in an LLC. The thing is, if you buy in an LLC, your interest rate will be higher. And then sometimes the only way you qualify is with a debt service coverage ratio loan, DSCR loan. You know what? Those are high risk. A lot of the ones that I called about this summer were a 10% interest rate. And I know that some people are still buying with them. There's nothing wrong with that if you can make the numbers work, if you can add a bedroom, if you could substantially add revenue to the home, there's really nothing wrong with that. It's good to be honest about what your own money situation is before you go buy a massive asset, because it's only going to set you up for failure. And unfortunately, those are the houses that get retraded 6 months to a year later. They're bought up by somebody who can take the house the rest of the way and make it what it was supposed to be. So that's the pre-purchase or financing budgeting. I really like to suggest have like a good 6 month runway on a house, and it doesn't that rainy day fund, the reserves. I don't think that necessarily has to be cash. In my opinion, it's okay if the reserve portion is, a home equity line of credit that maybe you have to tap into, or a business line of credit, or maybe it's a line of credit against stocks or something like that, or maybe it's stocks that you might have to drain out to go, like, that's okay, because that's not necessarily real cash at the time of purchase, but you just want to have access to things to make it so you can really survive a full year, regardless of if you get crappy weather one winter, or heck, a pandemic hits and then for 3 months everything is shut down again. It's really important to just kind of understand and be honest with yourself as to where you are. The next piece is the purchase. Now, this is really interesting because we've seen lots of people very well qualified to buy, but then once they purchase the house, they really struggle. Maybe they needed a higher down payment, or there was higher closing costs because of whatever their financial situation might be. One thing I've noticed is that anyone that came to us for consulting, for on how to design the house and what to do to it, anyone that actually followed through with that right now is absolutely crushing it right now.
And
Anyone that
you're
didn't,
saying that not even as like an ego, like truly, the people that have listened to both of us wholeheartedly are
yeah,
all having massive success. And that is like, period, end of story. We can point to it. It's the
yeah,
people that listen to half of it. Maybe they purchased the house I told them to, but didn't listen to the other half of what you said. Those
yeah.
are the people that are really hurting and blaming the market.
Totally. And what I'll say is some of it depends on when you launch too, right? Like if
Right.
you
Yeah.
launch at the beginning of slow season, again, make sure you have the 50 to $100,000, if that's what it's going to take to make the property as good as it possibly can be, to attract the most guests. If you're launching like right before peak season, maybe you do some of it then, but have, and not all of it, but have a plan for right when slow season starts to continue to make upgrades. I was telling you this, Will, our house in Cape Cod that we bought in 2019, I spent 4 years reinvesting every single dollar that I made back into that house to make it what it
Yeah.
is today. And I still have about 20K worth of updates that I want to make, which who knows if I'll get to it, because I'm using it most of this summer instead of renting out. I'm going to enjoy it myself. But, even up in Maine, in Bethel, we've had that for 2 years. We have never taken a dollar out of it. We've continued to reinvest. I'm already now back to, we just did a whole living room redo, and that place will be painted and get central AC in the coming months too. So it's like continuing to make updates and push the limits. I think when people buy a home and almost expect, okay, I'm not going to do anything that I really know deep down I should, and I'm going to pocket that money. I'm going to take it, that net cash, I'm going to put it in my pocket. I'm not going to make any updates. And then it's like, well, you can't really expect the consumer to want something that's not updated or that's competing with things when, quite frankly, there's better homes that have better amenities for more affordable price. So it's
Right. So just because it's short-term rentals, I think there's not a short runway for getting it on. And a lot of the people, yeah, it's a short-term rental. Let's just get it on. Let's go. The most successful operators are launching when they're ready because they have the budget and they have the plan and they execute on the plan. They don't just do 50% of the plan and then launch and then make some and then do 50%. Those are the people that are hurting. So if you're going to do this, do it the right way. And what we're talking about is the right way and you will be successful, but the
yeah.
people that are hurting, they were quick to get it on. We got to make some money. We got to make some money. And I get that going into hot season, but that's a pretty rare turnaround time, honestly.
Yeah. What's really interesting too is, I think back to some of the bigger pockets podcasts out there that were always just get in there and do it and learn. Well, you got to make sure that your finances allow you to do that also.
Right.
Like, I
Yeah.
get it. I've bought a house with no money out of my pocket down in Tennessee. I get it. Like, I've done it. I've been there. We still have that house. It's freaking awesome. It crushes it. That's a long-term rental. But either way, like if you're gonna jump into it, right? Like no one likes being stressed. It's okay to stay within a comfort zone of finances. Just figuring it out, I think, only takes you so far. And if short-term rentals is the industry that you want to just figure it out in or get to like learn this industry better, don't be scared to try your hand at co-hosting or something like that and build up some really good, strong cash flow and then go buy something, right? And then that way, if you're taking a risk, you still have some additional income to offset, and build up that reserve fund. So it's really, really interesting. It's an interesting concept. I think it's something that people do really struggle with, but I think it's becoming ever more apparent to people now what it takes at least in 2024 to have a really successful property. And it doesn't and what I'll say is that target is always moving. It does not mean that it's always getting harder. It's just that some years are harder and some years are easier. And a lot of that can be based off of what Mother Nature gives you, to be totally honest.
Or the economy. Like totally transparent, a long-term rental I have, I went from 3650 a month to now it's rented for 3500 a month. The economy, I mean, that's an expensive, it's a single family rental, but the economy changed, right? There's less stimulus
Yeah.
money going out there, and people were spending less on consumer debt. So I had to pivot as a long-term rental investor. So it's not just this, it's other asset classes too. Things ebb and flow, but that's real estate. This is a long-term hold. We're short-term renting the property, but I intend to hold all these assets for quite a long time. So keep that in mind. Some years are great, some years hurt, but over 10 years, it's a pretty level playing field.
Oh, totally. Even over 5 years. And we actually had a question. It's related to finance, not totally on topic for here, but I think it'll be interesting if one person asks it, other people's might, other folks might. It was, how do you account for payments on your taxes as a co-host? I'm going to try and dissect that real quick, and then we'll keep charging forward, and I'll answer it in two different ways just to make sure I hit it. Um, as a co-host, we actually collect all of the income from guests and we pay out owners, we pay out cleaners, we pay out cleaners after they clean, we pay out owners once a month, but we remit those taxes like under our name. And then we pay out owners the difference of that. As it relates to um, like my own income, I guess that would just be like I'm taxed just like anybody else. That
I had a
what
tax prep call today, and I'd jump in and like say, if you have any interest in real estate investing or advanced tax strategy, or I'm going to throw this out there, if you make more than $150,000 a year, you have to have a true CPA. There's a lot of high earners I talk to that have no idea, like about the Augusta rule, for instance. And it's not, none of this stuff is publicized, but high income earners that do their own taxes with H&R Block or things like that, you really should be forecasting with a trained professional that knows your situation and knows your properties and assets like rentals, who can forecast. I know exactly what my tax bracket is. I know exactly what I'm going to owe the IRS based on
right.
my properties. And it's really knowing that ahead of time. So it's not a surprise. So I know I should save X percent of anything I make, put some in reserves, and then you have a tax account.
Totally, totally. And so just to put a cap on that, going back to the sort of the first version, we co-host everything under our own account. And because we're collecting all of the taxes, either Airbnb and VRBO are remitting them on our behalf, or if they're direct booking, we pay the IRS the lodging taxes, things like that for the state of Maine or whatever states we're in.
And I'll say the common misconception is, I've heard this from hosts, oh, but Airbnb remits tax. You still have to pay income tax on that.
Yeah, yeah,
A lot
yeah.
of people don't know that. It's crazy to think, but like they don't know that. It's not publicized.
Exactly. Exactly. Now, let's go back to some budgeting and forecasting. I think that a lot of people get really fancy with like they almost try and do it as if it's long-term rental where I'm like actually budgeting for vacancy, repairs and maintenance, capital expenditures. I don't get like we don't get that granular with it, and part of it is because we've literally with both of our houses always just put money back into the home. Our short-term rentals, while they do produce income, they're lifestyle assets. We use them. We really love vacationing at them. Like, I don't look at those as big revenue generating opportunities in my life. If I did, and I was relying on that income, what I would do is I'd probably take 20 to 50%, depending on how new the home was or what updates I had made up to that point, and I'd probably stash it away for those types of repairs or capital expenditures or updates or snow removal or whatever it might be. Um, that's how I kind of look at it. I don't try and over formula it. What about you, Bill? Or, well,
Yeah, on all the performance we do with clients, 3% minimum for just capital expenditures. So on $100,000, asset, that should cover. Hopefully, you don't need to touch that, but in my eyes, that covers. Hey, I have to, paint a bedroom because there's smudges all over the place, or a
yeah,
deck board needs replacement. These are just the oh crap things that come up.
yeah,
Oh, your boiler needed a new expansion tank, 800
yeah,
bucks. That is something, 3 grand a year should cover you for just capex, right? Long-term rental investing, they might use a little higher with vacancy, but just repairs and maintenance, I like 3%. That's a great number. A lot of the houses we're selling are newer construction, but
sure.
every property is different. So for your house in Cape Cod,
Yeah,
little beach cottage, it might be less because it's so small and there's really not a lot to go wrong versus your house in the mountains. You had to put some more work into it. You had a big deck you had to replace, right? So maybe it was
yeah,
10%. So work with your agent on the purchase side to figure out what your capital expenditure should be. And that's why you need to work with somebody who understands short-term rentals. But I know every single year I'm going in, I'm not repainting the entire house, but painting high surface areas. I'm getting carpets professionally cleaned. I'm getting windows professionally cleaned. These are things I just do anyway. So it
yeah.
falls within my fixed percentage. This year, I'm replacing all the carpets and flooring in my kitchen, right? In one of the units. That's more, but it's been budgeted for. So just as a standard, I like the 3% if it's a
Yeah.
pretty straightforward property, but just got to tailor fit that and it should be in the pro forma. That's the
Totally.
biggest thing.
The other pro tip I have is, at least in our experience, we've often, when buying homes, had to replace some pretty major appliances. I mean, half the reason sometimes people sell is just because they don't want to deal with replacing those items, or they don't have the money
Right.
to, and just tired of the home. Whenever we replace items or buy new amenities or things like that, I always, always, always get like the workers, like the warranty on things.
Right.
My hot tub, I've had to call them. They've probably come out 3 or 4 times over the last 2 years, but I have a 5-year warranty, 100% coverage of anything and the service when it breaks. No brainer, right? I have new washer and dryer, 5-year warranty on that. Sometimes in these more remote markets, it's hard to find really good techs to service these things. And even so, you don't want to pay like it's actually cheaper to pay a few $100s for that warranty up front. Same with, furnaces and water heaters and water filtration systems, all the generators, all those things, it really helps if you get ahead of that by paying up for the warranty on the front end. I've never been disappointed getting those for appliances for a home.
And those are things that can crush your cash flow, right? If you don't plan. I'm always planning with clients I know through flips and new construction, like a boiler, you can get 20 years out of it if it's taken care of right. Service on that's $400 a year. So we can build your budget. A lot of people, they don't think about that kind of stuff, or stuff happens, right? I don't know if a fridge is going to last 15 years or 4 years, but stuff like that can ruin your cash flow. But if you have reserves in place and you're planning ahead of time, a
Yeah,
$1,500 refrigerator, oh well, comes out of the account, right? Versus I can't make a mortgage payment and I need to do a cash call to my buddies who invested with me, for instance, right? So really planning will prevent a lot of headaches because stuff happens. I mean, I just had to replace a stove in a long-term rental. It's not just short-term rentals.
totally, totally. Well, my friend, I think we're coming up to the top of the half hour. I guess the moral of the story is, when you go to buy something, make sure you can afford it. I think that, I don't see the landscape for, this isn't short term rent. Like, I don't see the landscape for real estate investing changing uh,
Nope.
anytime soon. I think the interest rates are going to continue to be high. I think you're going to have to continue to put out a quality product to get a quality guest and get quality revenue. And, at the end of the day, what I will say is every property I've ever bought is worth significantly more right now than when I bought it. And I don't see that changing either.
Nope. I think it's just the 80-20 principle, right? The top 20% will
Yeah.
continue to succeed and thrive. It's going to be a great market for those people. The other
Yeah.
guys, they're going to hurt. They'll probably make some money on the sale of their property, but we're just going to see an exchange in owners, which is great. A couple of years, rates come down, big refi opportunity, but nothing's changing. And this has been the thing for the last couple of years. COVID just made this artificial market that
Yeah.
everybody's still kind of used to.
Middle class is going away, man. There's
Right.
in the STR world. So awesome. Well, Will, if folks want to buy a house anywhere in New England, how can they find you?
Yeah, reach out to me, willvanwickler.com, set up a free discovery call, and we can go over exactly what you're looking for, find your price point, and find your market, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. And if somebody needs some help maybe setting up their short-term rental, the consulting thing is just blowing up, Dave, or
Yeah.
they want some management help, how can they
Yeah.
find you?
Yeah. Dave Menapace here. You can find me www.5strcohost.com. You can also just find me on Instagram, Dave_Menapace. Give me a holler. We'd love to help you out.
Awesome. Well, I'll catch you next week.
You got it, my friend. Take care.